North Carolina wears ordinary like a disguise. Rivers twist beneath old steel bridges, their surfaces black as polished glass. Forests thicken until the daylight thins to a green hush. Highways drill straight through farmland and keep going, farther than any set of headlights dares to promise. It looks like the kind of place where nothing unexpected happens, the kind of place that lets you breathe easy. But around here, ordinary is not safe. Ordinary is how the state smiles while it locks the door. Ask anyone who keeps the late shift or rises before dawn. A truck will be found idling by the river, driver's door yawning open, engine purring to no one. Hunters will step into familiar woods and never step back out, their packs tidied, as if they were put away by careful, invisible hands. A house will bloom with blue fire that does not consume wood or paint or air, as though the flames burn inward, quietly feeding on something we can't name. A family will pull onto the shoulder of Highway 74 for reasons we will argue about forever and leave behind suitcases, sandwiches, a teddy bear, and nothing of themselves. Bootprints will walk the rim of a gorge and stop mid-stride like a sentence, cut exactly in half. Carnival lights will blink alive in a pasture with no permits and no tire tracks, a one-night city of music that dissolves by morning as if dawn itself turned the switch. These are not whispers traded at gas pumps. They are reports and registry entries and evidence bags, the stubborn paperwork of grief. North Carolina keeps a file for each of them in places that do not forget sheriff's offices, ranger cabins, kitchen drawers where mother never learned to stop hoping. The landscape does not just stretch across a map. It listens, and sometimes it chooses what to return. So lock your doors. Put on your headphones. Let the night grow a shade darker behind your screen. Because after this, you won't see this state as a patchwork of quiet towns and patient trees. You will see the seams where the ordinary splits and the real thing peers through. We will begin where the water moves slow enough to swallow sound and keep it, the Cape Fear River, on a January morning when a fisherman cut his engine, stepped onto frost-stiff grass, and found a truck breathing to itself by the bank waiting for a driver who never came back. The Cape Fear has a way of holding its breath. On a January morning in 2009, frost gnawed the grass by the riverbank outside Fayetteville, and a fisherman nosed his skiff toward a pale ribbon ashore. Before his boots touched ground, he heard it, the hush of an idling engine, steady as a sleeper's chest. A pickup waited there, angled toward the water, driver's door open, headlights throwing weak, yellow bones into the mist. Inside, a wallet, a cell phone, a half-empty thermos of coffee, still warm enough to fog the lip. Receipts in the glove box traced to plain life gas, groceries, the arithmetic of any weekday. The registration gave the truck a name, Brian Douglas, 28, a mechanic who lived only a few miles of back roads away. The bank gave nothing back. No footprints. No scuffle in the dirt. Just an engine gently counting seconds. Deputies arrived and walked the reeds, calling his name until their voices thinned. The river that day was slow, almost polite. Visibility beneath was not. Divers swept arcs in the dark for 3 days, hands combing through silt that rose like ghosts and settled like secrets. The only answer came from a phone company's records at 12:47 a.m., less than an hour before the fisherman's discovery. Brian had dialed his own voicemail. 30 seconds on the tape-muffled breath, the rush of something that might have been wind, might have been water, and then a click like a door deciding it had heard enough. Suicide was the department's first shape for the story. His family refused the fit. No note. No history. A new job on the lift. A fishing trip planned next weekend. Neighbors remembered him in the driveway the night before, waving a socket set like a joke baton, smiling at nothing in particular. Days later, a tackle box turned up lodged in reeds downstream. Inside, lures, line, and a single folded sheet hand-drawn river curves, with an X scratched 2 miles from where the truck had sat. The divers went. The silt shifted. Nothing rose. After that, the Cape Fear kept getting strange. Anglers spoke of headlights idling behind the treeline, whispering their hum for hours until anyone stepped close, and the clearing went as silent as a cut wire. One deputy, patrolling in 2016, swore his radio drowned in static and then cleared for a single word, low and thick, as if spoken from a mouth full of river waiting. Each January, Brian's family leaves flowers by the bank, and some mornings you can still smell gasoline under the cold. Because in North Carolina, the water does not always take. Sometimes it keeps. And if it can unmake one man beside calm current, what chance do two seasoned hunters have in a forest that decides, together, they should not come back? The Uwharrie National Forest is smaller than the Smokies, but it presses closer, like a room with the windows shut. In November 1981, two men who knew it better than most shouldered their rifles and disappeared between its pines. David Keller and Franklin Moore were in their 40s, the kind of hunters who could read a ridge like a calendar. They parked off a dirt road, signed the hunter registry at the trailhead in a neat, practiced hand, and stepped into trees they had walked for years. Other hunters on the ridge watched them angle east along the creek bed. No one saw them after that. When they did not come home by Sunday night, the calls began. Deputies reached the truck where the men had left it still dusted in the week's mud, still perfectly parked, still facing the woods as if waiting for its owners to reappear. No tracks led away from the tires, as if wind had scrubbed the ground clean. Dogs caught scent along the creek and pulled hard for nearly 2 miles until the trail ended in a stand of pines so close the air felt stapled. There the hound circled, whimpered, and refused to go forward, pawing at soil that offered no story. On the third day, searchers found the detail that would turn the stomach cold. 2 backpacks in a small clearing, side by side, neatly zipped. Inside matches, food, cigarette supplies that speak of a weekend not yet finished. No rifles. No men. No footprints around the packs. The ground itself was undisturbed, as if the bags had been lowered from a hand that never touched earth. A hunter swore he heard 3 gunshots at dusk on the first night, 3 flat echoes that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, but the search turned up no casings, no torn brush, no blood, just the echo still hanging like a thread between the trees. By day 6, helicopters stitched grids overhead. Infrared swept shadows clean and found nothing. At night, radios snarled with such hard interference that teams rotated channels every half hour like sailors turning a wheel in bad water. Theories set like wet plaster, a fight, exposure a wrong step. But the weather had been kind, and the forest was thick with people looking. 2 men leaving no trace in friendly weather did not fit. Years slid by. The Uwharrie made a legend out of facts. In 2004, a hiker found a single boot not far from those pines, sole-worn smooth, laces intact, leather dark with time. Moisture had rinsed the DNA clean, as if even the evidence had been washed of memory. Families still leave what the men liked: cigarettes for David, jerky for Franklin, tokens in a clearing where the air feels heavy. Locals warn newcomers not to follow the creek east after dusk, not because of bears, because the forest remembers, and sometimes remembering is the same as keeping. If the Uwharrie can hold 2 men and their rifles without a sound, what do you make of a house on Bragg Road that burns without ever catching fire? Bragg Road looks like a back road you forget as soon as you turn off at Pines and Oaks Trading Shade, mailbox numbers fading under pollen. But in the early 1990s, people started calling in the same site with the same tone, a 1-story house on that stretch shimmering with blue fire. Not orange tongues, not smoke, but a steady veil, as if the air itself had decided to burn. Engines screamed up from the station. Firefighters jumped down expecting heat, panic, a hose line fight. What they found every time was silence. The siding cool to the touch. No scorches. No smoke. Only the faint, guilty smell of char hanging over the yard like a story no one wanted to tell. It kept happening. Different witnesses, same house. The flames rising a few feet over the roofline like a halo someone forgot to turn off. Then, the paperwork split from the world. By the late 90s, county records called the parcel a vacant lot no dwelling, no fixtures, nothing to insure. Neighbors swore the opposite. They saw curtains, a lamp pooling warm light against glass, the half-silvered silhouette of someone moving room to room. When two teenagers dared each other across the lawn in 2001, they stood at the door listening to low, braided voices inside, like a radio tuned just below sense. One boy curled his fingers around the knob and yelped. Angry welts rose on his palms. The metal under his grip felt cold. A utility clerk flagged something odd a year later. Power bills posted in cash, on time, at an address the county had erased. Who was paying for a house that officially did not exist? Witnesses kept describing the same impossible fire. It did not flicker. It shimmered. It did not eat out. It seemed to burn inward, as if the flame was feeding some hollow we did not have a word for. In 2012, the county stamped condemned on the file and sent a demolition crew. The crew drove back before lunch, white as paper. One worker said he watched his partner step onto the roof and vanish in a flash of blue blink, and the man stood on the lawn, dry-mouthed and shaking, with no memory of getting down. They fenced the lot. On maps it is empty. Unofficially, people still pull off once or twice a year and watch the glow roll over the dark like a tide. Some say swamp gas. Others say bad wiring. There is no swamp. There is no wiring. Folks who stare too long swear faces gather in the blue, oppressed crowd at the windows, outlines begging to be let out. The fire department does not come anymore. Neighbors draw their curtains and wait for the color to drain. If a house can burn without fire, what can a highway do to a family bent toward the coast and the weekend? We turn east now to Highway 74 and a Ford LTD that held everything but the people it belonged to. Highway 74 is supposed to be a straight answer west to east, mountains to sea, a line you can follow with your finger across a map. In the 1970s, the Parker family traced that line for a summer visit to Wilmington and never touched shore. James and Linda were in their 30s, steady people with weekend plans and little kids who counted billboards like constellations. They pulled out of Charlotte at dusk with an atlas folded to their route, a cooler heavy with sandwiches and soda, and a teddy bear missing one ear buckled in by a little hand. They told neighbors, "See you Monday." No one ever did. 3 days later, a state trooper spotted their Ford LTD sitting clean on the shoulder outside Lumberton, angled as politely as a car can be. The doors were locked. The keys still rested in the ignition. Inside were 4 packed suitcases, a road atlas opened to the same ribbon of highway they should have been on, a neat cooler, and that one-eared bear slumped against the back seat as if it had fallen asleep. The registration waited in the glove box, ready to prove what no one doubted. The car offered everything except the family it belonged to. Investigators pulled the gas receipts and found a last stop 40 miles west. The attendant remembered the Parkers' kids sharing a bag of chips. The parents tired, courteous, and eager to keep moving. Somewhere between the fluorescent island of that station and the neutral shoulder near Lumberton, life slid off the axis. Searchers combed the ditches and the pine rows. No footprints led away from the LTD. No diners or motels logged the family. No one had picked up strangers who looked like them. Rumors arrived as fast as patrol cars, a staged escape, hitchhiker violence, a fight that went too far. The evidence did not bother to agree with any of it. Weeks later, the car gathered dust in impound until an officer opened the door to inventory and froze. A faint song, something you would hear from a wind-up toy or a children's record, threaded the air from the dead radio. The battery had been disconnected. He shut the door. The music stopped like breath held too long. The Parkers' relatives kept faith the only way they could: photos to newspapers, birthdays marked, Christmas cards written to an address that would not answer. No credit card surfaced. No social security numbers stirred the bureaucracy awake. The road stayed quiet. If you ask locals what they notice on damp summer nights, they will tell you about a figure by the shoulder, a woman waving until a driver slows and she fades into trees. They will tell you about laughter thin as static crossing the asphalt. Every year, someone leaves a new teddy bear near the mile marker where the Ford was found, a small memorial for a family that set out and never arrived, a soft sentinel for 4 empty seats. If a highway can fold a family into its lane markings, what can a cliff-lined gorge do with a single set of footprints and a camera that caught a picture tilting out of hand? Linville Gorge does not forgive mistakes, and it does not explain miracles. In October 2012, Andrew Carter drove west from Raleigh to hike Alone 27, a grad student with a neat car and a habit of texting his sister when the trailhead sign came into frame. At noon, he did just that, boots laced, pack slung, his grin a little tight, the wooden post behind him pointing downhill toward the river. After that single photo, the gorge swallowed detail. Rangers found his car where it should be, interior tidy, a guidebook open to the page about the river crossing he meant to tackle. It rained the night before, not enough to flood, just enough to soften dirt into something that remembers. They picked up his prints easily and followed them down, heel, toe steady, unpanicked until 2 miles in, the earth decided it was finished recording. No cliff edge, no stream to rinse the trail clean. The ground ahead was firm enough to take a story and simply declined. The footprints stopped mid-stride, one boot lifted from history. Search widened in slow rings. Dogs nosed the end of the prints and then bristled, paws set, tails pressed tight. Handlers said the scent seemed to float, as if it rose and thinned until there was nothing left to chase. 50 people combed the ravines and ledges. Teams rappelled faces of stone that usually keep secrets for centuries. The river ran cold and loud. Divers cut its echo into squares and found only water. On the third day, a volunteer nearly sat on Andrew's backpack propped against a tree as politely as waiting in a hallway. Inside granola bars, a half-full bottle, a camera. The last picture time stamped 1:17 p.m., a slanted view of the gorge as if the lens had tilted or the hand holding it had eased open mid-click. No more images. No broken brush, no torn fabric, no rope burn or snap strap, nothing a story could use to ground itself. By week's end, the gorge had given back only rumors. Hikers spoke of the smell of wood smoke where no fires are allowed, a thin blue thread that drifted and disappeared. Once, just once, a ranger heard a man's voice haul itself up from the throat of the canyon and call faint, syllables torn by distance. Radio logs had no one there. The earth does not just swallow footprints, one ranger said, folding the map like he was trying to close a book that would not end. But here it did. If tracks can end on solid ground and a photograph can tilt away from its owner mid-breath, what do we make of a carnival that arrives in Cherokee County for one night, lights every bulb, and vanishes without a tire mark before dawn? It happened in heat. Summer 1965, the kind of night when cicadas stitch one endless note and the blacktop sweats. In Cherokee County, a handful of families swear they followed a lift of music thin and cheerful, a wobbling calliope like a grin that can't hold steady down a back road to a pasture where no fair had ever set stakes. There, lights swung between poles as if strung by invisible hands. A Ferris wheel turned slow enough to make the stars jealous. Swings lifted in lazy arcs. Game stalls showed their prizes, glassfish, tin whistles, felt bulls' eyes that puffed chalk when the rings landed true. People remember the smell most clearly: popcorn and oil and something sweet, like spun sugar laid over fresh cut grass. Cars pulled along the fence. Headlights clicked off. The field glowed in its own weather. A man remembers paying a ticket taker whose face he can't quite describe except for the smile that seemed older than the teeth behind it. A girl, lost for a breath in the scrum of knees and elbows, reappeared with a paper ticket clenched in her fist, blank on both sides. No ink, no logo, just a weightless little rectangle the color of old bone. Someone swore he recognized the tune piping from a carousel. Later, he could not hum a bar of it. Another remembers the Ferris wheel's gondolas creaking like a wooden porch, and how the air felt cooler the higher they rose, as if they were lifting into last year's night. Morning emptied the field like a magic trick explained too fast. Dew beaded, uncrushed grass. No ruts, no footprints, no gum wrappers stuck to the earth. Sheriff's deputies called it a mix-up, a traveling show cutting through. County records said otherwise. No permits issued, no rental scheduled, no fairground insurance filed that year. They rang the big outfits. No one claimed the stop. Still, the stories matched in their stray details the way the bulbs hummed. The reflection of light skipping over car windows like stones across a pond. The exact sound of a ring hitting a bottleneck and making a little bell out of it for a single bright second. In 1972, a farmer clearing brush from the same pasture lifted a tangle of painted wood, slats with bright red and yellow still clinging in cheery stripes. The pieces smelled faintly of smoke. Tests later said the paint was older than the summer of '65. Today, cows crop the grass and ignore the fence line where the ticket booth might have stood. But if you park there after dark, sometimes the field blinks, just once, as though someone is testing a string of bulbs you can't see. If you kill the engine and listen hard enough, a tune wanders up the hill, not loud and not long, just enough to tell you that something set up here for a night and then took everything it needed when it left, including the proof that it had ever been. 6 stories in, and the map of North Carolina looks less like counties than thresholds. One more turn back through each place that keeps more than it gives, and what that means for anyone who thinks ordinary is a promise. Here's what the map looks like now, not a quilt of counties, but a scatter of thresholds where the ordinary split and something stepped through. A pickup exhaling by the Cape Fear, polite as a dog waiting at the door, while its owner's last word waiting seems to travel under the surface and never drowns. 2 hunters in Uwharrie, men who knew the ridges like handwriting, reduced to zipped backpacks, placed with a care that feels inhuman, as if returned after inventory by a hand that does not touch the ground. A house on Bragg Road that wears blue fire like a veil and refuses to be real in county ledgers, yet bills are paid, palms blister on cold metal, and somewhere inside a chorus of low voices keeps its own temperature. A Ford LTD on Highway 74, still and self-contained, holding a route, a cooler, and a bear with one ear, while an entire family is reorganized into rumor, roadside mirages, and a children's song playing from a dead radio. Bootprints that stop mid-stride above the Linville, a camera that catches the moment gravity forgot its manners, and a backpack waiting, patient as an empty chair. A carnival that raises a temporary city of light and laughter on a pasture that, by morning, remembers neither tire nor footprint, only a tune that slips the mind the moment you try to hum it. Taken alone, each file reads like a stubborn error, a missing body, an uncooperative landscape, a witness whose details are too good. Together, they make a pattern not of causes, but of refusals. The river refuses to return. The forest refuses to disclose. The house refuses to occupy its own address. The highway refuses to be merely transit. The gorge refuses to record. The field refuses to be proof. It is as if parts of North Carolina have decided to act like curators, lending what they will and keeping what they won't, and our evidence receipts, timestamps, photographs arrives like dull currency at a counter that takes a different kind of coin. So lock your doors. Dim the room. Let the quiet around your screen stretch a little. These were not campfire tales. They were reports and registry pages, and still open cases filed in places that do not forget, even when the rest of us try. If one of these stories stayed with you, if your fingers kept straying to the window latch during the Blue Firehouse, or if Highway 74 now feels longer than it did this morning, tell us which haunt lingers and which state's ordinary you want us to test next. There is a whole playlist waiting, one threshold after another. But remember, some places do not want visitors, and some stories do not stay gone once you hear them.